Uh, I think, if I may, I think at times you've used perfection as a driver for high performance.
Yeah.
And so if you would consider yourself to be a recovering perfectionist, but I will say that your attention to detail and how much you care shows. And what I want to say is that you are excellent at this. And in excellence, it doesn't matter if you make a mistake to me. So you've done nothing as far as you and I go to to screw up. We can wipe the slate clean. And if we breathe together for 60 seconds, I think it can do a physiological reset. And then we can start again and see where it goes, if you're willing.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I need to. Normally, you're right. Everything you said is true. And it's just, we're trying to do so much here. It is, oh yeah, walk me through it. You are good at this. No, please tell me what to do.
So listen, there's two things. One is framing it, and the other is tools. There's only two things we can train. Framework, how we frame this moment, this experience, what we're trying to do, and our career as a whole, how we frame it matters. And then secondly, there's tools like whether we're breathing or not, whether we're activating one part of our brain or not. So there were mistakes that happened. And I think as they compounded, I think it's harder for there not to be head noise. Fuck, right? Like the externalized self-talk that's inevitable that comes out in performance. So one quick way to activate the other part of our brain, the parasympathetic, not the sympathetic, not the get the car off the baby, not the get the tiger away from me, but the parasympathetic is basically to do a certain kind of breath. So what they do in Navy SEAL training is called box breathing. And I think we should do 60 seconds. I'll set a timer of box breathing. All we're going to do is we're going to breathe to the count of 4. We're going to inhale through the nose. We're going to hold at the top. We're going to exhale to the count of 4. And we're going to hold our breath out for the count of 4. So we're going to just breathe in a box. It's going to be 4 in, 4 hold, 4 out, 4 hold. So the first thing you just need to do is just exhale all the air out of your breath, out of your lungs. I'll do it with you. We're going to breathe in at the count of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. Exhale. 2, 3, 4. Hold the breath out. 2, 3, 4. Breathe in. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. Breathe out. 2, 3, 4. Breathe in, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4. Breathe out, 2, 3, 4. And hold, 2, 3, 4. Breathe in, 2, 3, 4. Hold. Breathe out. Hold. And then breathe normally for a couple of seconds. Sometimes people can get pretty lightheaded. Not everyone.
No, that was that helps. That genuinely and literally helps.
Great.
Yeah, thanks for identifying that for our viewers and our members at home. The launch of today's interview was a host of things that had continually interrupted, not the least of which was I was off my game this morning. I had a tricky morning with a lot going on, and I try to approach every one of these interviews. Joe knows this. I've interviewed him before with a certain perspective and a certain degree of, I guess, perfectionism as you described it. And it's a good reminder that those things get in the way of the mindset. This was not planned. This was literally a lousy start to the show. And I thought I'm going to include that with it. I'd love people to see how you sort of walked me through that and your thinking on that. With me on the show today is Joe Towne. Joe's a veteran actor and acting coach. He graduated from USC. He's an acclaimed award-winning writer, director. He's worked with performers and coached them, business leaders, actors, anyone who's got to take center stage and really deliver for an audience. He's got a great list of film and TV credits on IMDb, including The L Word, Fringe, Law and Order SVU, my personal favorite, All My Children. I love telling people that. My mom loves that. With me on the show today is Joe Towne. Joe, thank you, and thank you for getting me off to a much better start there. How you doing?
I'm doing well, Christopher, and I really appreciate you allowing us to take a moment to address what is. This moment, as you said, is like an unprecedented moment in our collective history, and sometimes we just need to take a breath. And it's so easy to say, right? Just take a breath. But people hear that and they're like, I don't have time for it, or I don't know how, or I'm going to look foolish, or really, like the cynical part, really take a breath. Thanks.
That's right. That's right. You helped me define what to take a real breath probably should look like for most people. I don't do it that way. I don't know if I've ever done that with the exception of the one yoga class I took 5 years ago. And you're absolutely right. It does impact your approach to whatever you're doing in that moment. That was such a great reminder. Talk to me about that. Talk to me about that thing and help people really understand for actors why that might be one of the most challenging careers in the world if you look at it from that perspective.
Yeah, I mean, what actors have to do and get to do is challenging. And we can either look at those moments as big or we can look at them as a moment. We have that option. And so how we frame these opportunities can either be a challenge for our brain or they can be a threat. And in a threat state, it's something that we can lose, right? So there's something at stake that we want. And if we don't perform in a certain way that we think they want or perfectly, we can lose it. And it puts our brain into something called threat state. And it's a different part of our brain that gets activated. And it isn't setting us up to have an optimal experience. Whereas a challenge is when we know that we have skill and we know that we can meet the skills of this moment. And if we use the tools that we have, breath being one of them, to get us present, then we can meet that moment. And all the biological things that are happening are there to serve us instead of work against us. And so I think how we frame opportunities or how we reframe them matters.
Joe, talk to me about what you're doing right now as an actor and as a coach to not just keep busy, but to keep ahead of where you're always trying to get your career or the work that you're working on, the careers of the actors you work with on track. How are you using this hiatus to the best of your potential? What are you doing?
Yeah, well, I'd say it's been a roller coaster. And I'd say that for the first week, in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I think the concept of making sure we had enough food in our house, making sure that my parents and my wife's parents, who recently isolated themselves here in California, my father didn't even have his stuff. He just had moved here. And we were concerned about them. We were concerned about them going out. And so we needed to make sure we took care of our basic needs. So food was one of them. We were sheltering in place. And what I found that I needed the most during that first stage was a heck of a lot of naps. I was exhausted, man. I was like helping adjust to the fact that my son is home full time, that there will not be school, that we're being bombarded by all of this information, and so many unknowns within the world, the government, the medical industry, so many conflicting pieces of information being thrown out there. So for the beginning part of this, when some people were talking about writing their King Lear and being productive, and I can't wait to binge watch all my favorite shows, at the beginning, all I could do was rebalance and move the needle a little bit from overwhelmed and triggered to more of a neutral space. Now that's evolved over time, but I will say that like so many people are thinking about how they can use this as a competitive advantage. And I think before we can get there, we got to get our basic needs met, because nothing creative has ever come from depletion.
When you look at the state of things going on right now, and with so many actors who have no doubt gone through the same experience you just described, they're likely still in that, right? Some people are still just trying to figure out how to pay the bills and make that transition from, the romantic version of the struggling actor to now the truly literal one, and the difference between those two, right? And can you draw on things like that? Doesn't this situation we're in right now make it maybe the most difficult time to be an actor ever, or no?
There's probably multiple layers of this. I'd say that, like, from our best selves perspective, this is going to be a moment we can all draw upon and say, I lived through a hard thing. I'm really hoping that collectively we can look at this and go, we made it through a very difficult thing together. And that gives us a sense of resiliency, because when you can train bouncing back from something hard, then you've cultivated something called grit. And grit is basically passion and perseverance over time. And it's knowing that we can live through difficult things. Now, that said, being an actor, we are our instrument and we deal in the world of emotion. And so whether it's a comedy and we have to be sharp and technical and playful and have fun, or whether we are doing something dramatic and we are channeling or drawing upon or using our imagination for something that is big emotion, there's an aftermath to all of that. To get switched on and be on for these moments where the lights are shining, it takes a lot to prepare for that, to get up for that, to get switched on, to manage being in that space, to stay in it, to flow with what's happening. And then we got to deregulate. We have to come down from that, and we need to recover before we can jump on the next wave. So there's a lot there in terms of what you said, but I don't know that it's harder than any other time. I'd say that certainly people had to pick themselves up in the wake of World War II. People have to pick themselves up and come back from losing people that they care about, or major economic recession. So there's a reality that we're all addressing collectively that I hope imprints itself on our art, and that we can use this moment as a metaphor and a parallel to how do we do difficult things? What are the tools we use during those difficult things? How do we find hope in difficult moments? And what do we do about it moving forward together?
What's your advice to actors right now? There's a ton of downtime. Is this really any different than any other time for actors who are in between gigs? And would your advice be the same then?
It's a great question. Very practically, recognizing what season we're in. So what season we're in is a season when, as soon as the industry opens back up, whatever that looks like, whether it's floodgates or a trickle, we need to know that we are ready and we can handle not only the moment that we're being invited, the opportunities and the auditions and the roles on set that we're being invited to do, but there's something that might be different after this that might never be the same. So basically, I don't know what this is like for folks in Toronto and in folks in Vancouver. I've been asking a lot of our groups what is happening. But I can say what's happening in Los Angeles is that I think the pre-reads and the idea of coming in the room might not be the same after this. I'm talking to casting directors, and what I'm hearing is that, self-tapes might be not only just part-time, they might be here to stay. Most of our initial calls may be self-tapes. After that, we may have callbacks via Zoom. There are people that are just simply not willing to put themselves at risk when this comes back and comes back quickly by being in a small room, breathing the same air as someone. So what I would say is three things. One, yes, we have to be prepared to go into rooms when and if that should happen. And so we need to know how we can be at our best in those moments. But right now we're functioning in isolation. So I think that there's some things we can do to get our house in order. The first is make sure we have a really simple home setup. We want to make sure that if we're in voiceover, we have a home booth, because there are people that are now at the front of the line because they're being invited to record things that actually will go to air if they have their technology house in order. There are those also, the ability to put ourselves on self-tapes using our laptop and a ring light, or our iPhone and a ring light, or using other technology. Down the road, we're going to want to have a fancier home setup. I imagine,
Oh yeah.
for some of us. So how do we get ready to use our basic iPhone setup? How do we use our fancier home setup? And if we're not ready for that, research it, figure out what your wish list is, and start, planning for when you're going to build that and where. And then lastly, get really familiar with the technology. So if that technology is Zoom, then get familiar with Zoom. And if you want to train it when there's no stakes. Have a Friday night coffee date with your pals. I don't know about coffee on Friday nights. I don't know why I put those two things together. That's just weird, Christopher. But
Irish up the coffee if you want, whatever.
Irish coffee. Yeah, it's a lovely Friday night. But I think the idea is like, have game night, hang out with your pals, and then use the technology to play around with it so that you're ready to go when that call comes in. So that's how I'm encouraging our actors to use this time, is get your technological house in order.
So you've been getting out on social media, and you've been talking, and you've really felt a sense of service to actors right now. And I really want to compliment you on that. I think that's important. We're trying to do the same thing and just give this back to our members and keep a conversation that's helpful in a lot of ways. As you create the content on social, on your Instagram and other portals, I'll put a link to those below. What's your underlying message? What are you trying to accomplish with those? What's been the feedback so far?
Well, thanks. I would say that there's a need for people in this time of distancing physically to stay connected. And isolation can be really hard. Isolation that's imposed and not chosen. And we know that longevity is predicted by our social connections. So if you want to increase your lifespan, then maintain your social relationships. That's from the blue zone theory. That's not something that we just came up with arbitrarily. And there's also good science that talks about how, I want to read you this one piece of science that I think is really fascinating for people, if you're willing. And it's really about what this moment is doing. Here it is. So researchers at Buffalo University in 2013 found that stressed people suffered major life disruptors: financial, relationship, medical, and career. And those people had an increased likelihood of death. It increased it by 30%. But stressed people who helped and were connected to others had a 0% increase. So the bottom line is, helping others reduces stress-related deaths, and it turns the science of stress as a killer on its head. So all of us are dealing with stress, all of us. And once we can manage our own stress through the tools that we have available, it benefits everybody to help out. Benefits our neighbors if we can pick up some medication for them. It benefits our loved ones to reach out and let them know how we're thinking about them. And the science of gratitude and the training that we do in mindset is not just about feeling better and being optimistic, but it is about priming an optimal way of being in the world. And so our relationship to stress matters. We can have stress work against us, or we can have stress work for us. So I've just wanted to show up. This is an unprecedented moment. And we're going through it all at the same time, which is odd, right? Like, if in the Australian fires, we could watch that, and if we know people down there, our hearts go out to them. Like, there were some crazy things people were doing to try to help out in Australia. And when things are happening and, something traumatic happens like 9/11, people from around the world, do vigils and they send their thoughts. But we're all going through this at the same time. So all I want to do is show up. I want to hold space. I want to ask people how they are. And I want to see if collectively I can offer any piece of insight or tool or something to help them ease their suffering at this difficult moment.
As someone who has had the opportunity to work with you before and who's really aware of the workshops you have mindset, one of the things I found so compelling about it was the first time maybe ever where I have been able, and I'm around actors a lot, I'm around the industry a lot, been able to see truly a breakthrough in learning and in training and coaching, because you were pulling from so many other places that I have never seen done before. I really think there is something truly unique about what you're doing with mindset. You were taking the psychology of sports, the psychology of business, where we have seen so much proven to be effective and really understood, and you brought it into the new world of creatives and of performers in such an intriguing way. Can you give just a little summary of what mindset is all about? Can you just talk? I want my audience to be familiar, because I'm going to refer to it a couple times in this conversation. What is the mindset as the model that you teach and you've developed? What's it all about?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Mindset to us is everything. It's the framework around performance. So I think a lot of us know how to tell a story. We either entertain people around our dinner table. We used to do it around campfires and tell the story of the hunt. And so if we wanted to be performers, most of us thought, I better tell stories better. So I have to go get my butt into a class. I have to go to train and get my skill down. And that's very true. We can learn our craft. We ought to be learning our craft as a lifelong journey, whatever our craft is. But that's not enough. We've seen a lot of really well-trained actors who psych themselves out at the 11th hour. We've seen a lot of people who have a proven track record of success who all of a sudden can't handle their nerves. And we've seen a lot of acting coaches start to recommend drug use and CBD oil and beta blockers and Xanax and a lot of things that are really discouraging as the only tool. So my personal belief, and I'll just speak for me, I don't know what the other members of Mindset would say, is that if you're having a moment and you need support, use it. But my concern comes when you run out, when you leave it at home, and when it stops working. My concern is the long-term relationship you have to your craft. So I want us to be sustainable in our industry. And so if you're using tear sticks and you're using beta blockers, you're not accessing parts of yourself that are possible through your imagination and through your awareness. And so what I'm really interested in is science. I'm really interested in science-backed practices. So the reason we're borrowing from sport is because sport studies things with millions of dollars of research, and we're just not doing that in the acting world.
That's right.
And so why don't we borrow some of those tools? So there are practices that the best cornerbacks in the NFL are using to manage their nerves and to frame their nerves that are allowing them to perform at the highest levels in the entire world. And so I don't understand why we wouldn't tap into that vein and start to utilize those practices. So what I'm trying to do is build a bridge between what the top executives are learning when they have experts come in and speak at Google or Facebook or Microsoft, when people are going into the NFL and the NCAA and NBA and they're talking to teams. Now every NFL team has an on-staff sports psychologist. It's mandatory.
Right.
So we don't have that in the acting and the arts. We've always had great tools in the arts, but a lot of them draw from practices like yoga or meditation or New Age thought. And I grew up around New Age thought. So I'm a product of a couple of hippies and raised in a commune for a couple of years in New York. So I'm aware of all those. And for a long time, my coaching revolved around everything from Wayne Dyer to Esther Hicks to Louise Hay. And I really appreciated all those things. I find them to be very generally helpful. I don't find that often a lot of those things offer practical how-to. So it's one thing to go on a 3-day silent retreat, but it's another thing when you're in the midst of waiting room with 10 people around you who are nervous and shaking their legs and going over their lines and trying to psych each other out, and how to navigate those choppy waters. So what we're trying to do is find science-backed practices that help us get ready to go on, switch on, perform, and then come down afterwards, reflect, and recover and get better.
The actors I've spoken to that have done your workshop and who have been a participant in Mindset, they are literally changed from it, and the reviews and the feedback is so overwhelmingly positive. You must know by this point, certainly, but in the early days of Mindset, a couple of years back, you were onto something great, because at one point it's already out there being used and proven in these other areas, but into another place, you're pioneering it, you're bringing it into acting, and visualization is such an important part of that in those other spaces that it can't not be effective here. And I think actors more and more are going, wow, this was really transformative. One of the other parts of that that's interesting to me is, in particular, let's stay on sports for a minute, the ability on Monday morning to go be, the quarterback, and to watch your game tape and to study how you moved, how your team worked together, all those elements. I use the analogy of Adam Driver, the actor, who's having a big couple of years right now, from Star Wars to Netflix Marriage Story. And he has said ad nauseum, he hates watching himself on tape. He will not do it. When you work with actors, and I think most actors often aren't always big fans of watching themselves, but yet here's an area where it might be essential. When you encounter that, what's your position on game tape, on watching the performer and helping them coach through tape versus through live? That seems to be another interesting new platform where coaches are trying to figure out this new divide of, can it be done just through virtual? Can it be done between two of us here watching it and dissecting it? Do you have to be in the scene to be a great coach and give great coaching, Joe?
There's a couple great questions in there. So the first thing I want to do is talk about how actors can approach self-tapes like athletes. And then I want to talk about the immediacy of this moment and what technology is inviting us to do. So when I first started auditioning, and I think this was true for a lot of actors who have been around for a few decades, you'd go in a room and the decision makers would be there, and then you would either get the job or a callback, or you wouldn't. And then after a while, there started to be these little camcorders popping up. And so you'd go in the room and you'd tape, and then you'd leave, and then they would pass the tape around, and they'd make copies, they'd make DVDs before there was digital. And so we would never get to see those unless you booked the job and it was leaked to the internet, and then you could watch that person's audition tape. But now we're in a unique time. And when I started to hear that 70% of people's auditions were self-tapes, and that was before this moment, this crisis, I started to think, God, this is an incredible opportunity. And so many actor friends I know either torture themselves, like 40 takes, and then they're like, but this one has a piece I like and this one doesn't, and how do I cobble it together? And they can't just show up and do it and then let it go. And so they're treating this practice different than they would in the room. And I think that sets us up for some traps, which we can get into if you want. But there's this opportunity to do what Kobe Bryant did. Kobe Bryant would watch a game back, and it would take him about 5 hours to watch an entire game. He would be scanning for positioning, footwork. He would be looking at what people were doing on the sidelines during timeouts. He had very specific things that he would scan for. And so what if actors had a checklist that they could do, that they could scan through on their tape and use it and break it down to be critical and get better? So many actors I know want to know how it went. They don't want to sit outside themselves watching themselves during the audition, because that's not being present. And they often don't find that getting feedback is valuable. It's too general, it's vague, or it's not actionable. So we're in this opportunity where if we can break down game film, we can train to get 1% better over time. So what we're doing in Mindset is we're moving from helping people modulate down their self-talk and their head noise and deal with their anxiety and nerves. And then we're starting to add in some things to their tool belt, like how do I prep in a way in an hour that allows me to go do my best work, not compromised work? Is there an alternative to memorizing, especially when I have 4 auditions due in a day? But ultimately what we're doing now is working on camera. And the way that we're working on camera is not about picking an eye line only, and it's not about the basics. There are plenty of wonderful teachers and casting directors and acting teachers teaching that content. Like what we said, we're trying to do the stuff that scaffolds around craft.
Right.
So we want to teach people how to break down their game tape the way basketball players and football players do to give themselves a competitive advantage moving forward. And I would say the opportunity of this moment is we can go into a live environment. What we do is we sometimes will bring guests in, surprise guests in our on-camera class. We're still in class right now, virtually. And so people are still getting to watch their tapes back. We still have guests that pop in on occasion. We like to keep people on their toes. And so people are getting that physiological activation of somebody watching them. They're getting the training around the things that trip them up with the technology because they're not used to it. And then afterwards, they get to watch their tape back and train to get better over time. So we're adapting all of our on-camera programs to work virtually. And we think that that's going to be the future, is so that we can reach more people by eliminating geography.
That's really fascinating and compelling stuff, especially in light of where we are right now, Joe. And to your point, the self-tape is only going to become increasingly more used as we come through this. The anxiety that comes with isolation, in particular for actors who haven't been able to get out as much as they likely do. What's your advice to help them make sure that that doesn't translate into those first self-tapes? What's your advice for them? Like I was going through this morning when you and I were trying to get this conversation started, and I just could not get there. I picture all these actors who are maybe out of step or practice for however long this can be, going, shit, how do I shake this off and make the most of that self-tape? How do you advise them, and what do you say to the actors you coach around that?
So two things. The first one is how we do small things is how we do all things. So our relationship to our nerves is something we can train on a daily basis. Anxiety in general, and this is going to be a huge generalization, and this is not me as a medical doctor because I'm not a medical doctor. But I will say in general, anxiety is produced in the body when we scan the future for potential things that could go wrong. And depression is when we have unprocessed things from the past. So in general, anxiety is not being in the present moment. So we can train our body, we can train our craft, we can train our mind. The next frontier is we all need mental skills training. So we have to figure out a way to get right here, right now. Be where your feet are and breathe. Be where your feet are and get in your body. Be where your feet are and say, what can I do in this moment to address these physiological sensations that are happening to me? There's a lot of great science out there. I've listened to hundreds of hours of podcasts and combed through, dozens of books. And so we put together a program to help people with this if they need it, whether it's via coaching or whether it's via one of our workshops. That's what they're for. But in general, we also like to offer these tools. So some of the things like the breath work we did before is one of those tools, and they're out there. So look up box breathing, look up Andrew Weil and 4-7-8 breath. And these are tools you can use to help with your anxiety right here, right now. The second part of it is in terms of the rust and in terms of this idea of shaking it off. There's two kinds of mindset. There's a growth mindset and there's a fixed mindset. And the woman that wrote the book on this, a woman named Carol Dweck, was at Columbia University for about 18 years. She's now been at Stanford for about 20 years. And she's been one of the most influential people we've yet to meet. She wrote the book on mindset. And basically the idea is when we go into a situation trying to get something or hit a target or prove to others that we're good and get the job, we are coming at that from a sort of fixed mindset where we have this identity that is on the line. And there's a ton of pressure that comes with that way of working. Now, one of the things that is the antidote for that is this concept of a growth mindset. Now, if I ask people, do you want to get better? They'll all raise their hands, generally speaking. Yeah, sure, I want to get better. But when you put it to the test, we default into trying to prove ourselves and get approval or get the job or have our work show up for us. And that is not growth oriented. That is a fixed mindset thing. So in this time, what we want to do is recognize, where are we? If I'm rusty, I'm rusty. So what do I care about? Can I care about getting better? So if we want to shake off the rust, Pick up one of these self-tape challenges that are being offered by amazing casting directors who are putting forth these invitations to people on the web and allowing them to shake off the rust by self-taping at home. And when they feel ready to send something on, send it on and then let it go and focus on what you can grow on from that experience. What can you learn? So we have a practice that we do after every time we work, and it is geared towards getting us to learn something from what we just did. Very practically, it sets us up for next time, because that's the only way we get 1% better over time.
What's your outlook on things? Dare to make any predictions on where you think the industry will be a month, 3 months from now? Are you optimistic? Are you concerned? How are you feeling?
I'm all of it. I'm concerned for the people who clearly are struggling to pay their rent and get their food in their bellies right now. I'm concerned for them because I feel like it's really hard to feel creative and motivated when I'm feeling overwhelmed. As far as the general industry goes, I'm very optimistic. I know that studios are banking scripts. I know that there are plans to pick up production and very quickly. I know that casting directors are on high alert. I know that people, as of last week, were booking jobs via Zoom as a network test. And I know that they're planning, at least as of now, production starting around June. So I would say whether or not that gets pushed back to the fall, it doesn't matter. There's going to be an influx of work and there will be a lot of opportunities. And so you can either move to the front of the line and be ready for that moment, or you can take care of focusing on other things right now, whether that's Wine of the Month Club or whether that's, binge watching something. And then once things ramp back up, then you can get your butt in gear. So it's up to you. Like, this moment is an invitation. And so if you want to be at the front of the line, then you can use this moment to get yourself sharp, get your technology house in order, get yourself some tools that you can train on a daily basis, 5 minutes at a time. Because look, if we go into the room, whatever the room is, on the field, on the stage, in the room, and we want to be present, if we want to quiet our head noise, if we want to be confident, if we want to be able to be playful and creative and show our best work, that doesn't just happen on a consistent level with mastery by accident. It happens because you train that all the time in all the things you do. So if you want to practice mindfulness, every time you go from sitting to standing, get aware of your environment and your body. Every time that you transition from an activity like work to exercising or exercising to cooking dinner, spend 2 minutes box breathing and train shifting and transitions and how we transition. If you want to, think of each doorway that you go through as an opportunity to practice going into the room. And how do you want to talk to yourself right before you go in the room? Because confidence comes from how we talk to ourselves. So you can train these things with everyday practical things that are going on for you, and then you'll be ready in the moment for that to be present for you when it's a pressure situation.
Talking to Joe Towne, the creator and the coach behind this incredible new series of learning experiences, of seminars, of courses, the Performer's Mindset, a longtime friend of mine and of casting workbook, someone that I think is truly, and this isn't a personal endorsement for me, I think you're one of the best acting coaches out there. I know you are when I talk to other actors who have worked with you. I really appreciate you coming on and doing the show today for us and helping me through a rocky start, which was really not planned at all. And it was a good thing that it was you of all people. Will you come back and do it another time when we're through this and we can expand a little more on some of the other stuff I'd love to get into with you?
Heck yeah, I'd love to. And thank you for what you said. I'm really grateful to be surrounded by a group of incredible artists and coaches, and we learn from each other. We challenge each other and we grow together. And everyone has incredible skill that's part of this company. And what's wonderful is everyone's a multi-hyphenate. They're all out there producing. They're all out there coaching. They're all working with scientists, or they're writing things, or they have successful podcasts, or they work on air as a host on sports networks. And they're not 20 years removed from the industry. We're all working right now. And we work during the day and we bring to our classes at night. And so I want to highlight how wonderful this community is, because it's not just me. It's never just me. This work is being drawn from greats, and we're standing on the shoulder of giants. And everybody that we come in contact with is an opportunity for us to learn and connect. In addition to acting coaching, there are a lot of wonderful acting coaches out there. We look at ourselves as performance coaches, which means the whole process, not just craft, but the framework around craft. And I would be happy to come on as many times as you'll have me. So thank you, Christopher, for this opportunity.
My pleasure, old friend. I'll link to some of that stuff below. Thanks for your message to our actors out there that really need to hear that at an important time. Joe Towne, everyone, thanks, and we'll see you next time on At Home Live. Joe Towne is a graduate from the University of Southern Carolina. He studied acting and directing.
Southern California. Oh, good.
What did I say?
Southern Carolina, I think you said.
Shit. Okay. Taking it from the top. My next guest on the show today is an acting coach. No, I've got it written. I'm just going to read it like I've got it here. With business leaders, he's worked with performers. Joe has boasted an I'm just having an off day here today, man. My next guest in the studio, it's on the show. That's why I keep writing it. In these uncertain times, in these extraordinary times, actors have a lot of things on their mind, right? Mm-hmm. To the L Word, my personal favorite, of course, All My Children. I love that you did that, Joe, and I never forget to mention. Oh, Christ. Kate, fuse went out. Bit of a panic here. Joe, are you there?
Yeah, I'm good, brother.
Fuck.
That was incredible. I don't know what you took, but that was great. Yeah, man, we're still recording.
No, it just cut right out on me. I lost everything for a minute there.
I see you. I see it still says recording on the Zoom link, but it has your picture up as the host. It's a very nice.